All right, what is going on, ladies and gentlemen? How is it going? I am Is There No One Else. In the video I'm bringing you today, apparently on Friday, they posted the 5.1.5 patch notes. It was not in the PTS forums. I did not see it until today. They snuck in a few edits, and so this video is going to be a little bit longer because it's going to cover all the patch notes. I'll probably do this video, and I'll provide a Cliff's Notes. I haven't seen all of them. But I feel like it's good to get this information out there for you guys because, as I said, the Vigor change in and of itself is a huge change worth going over and worth talking about and worth commending, in my opinion. So we're not going to discuss the item sets because, we already went through it. We went through the changes. I'm going to briefly look over them. If there's any noticeable change, you guys can go watch my videos on it. I just want to go into the actual patch notes. So sets are interesting. The proc sets are super interesting. Definitely going to try them. Phoenix set, Martial Knowledge. Martial Knowledge is interesting. Elemental Succession looks legitimately good now. It'll definitely be worth trying on a few classes. I was looking at it for a Mag Warden and a Mag Necro because they all have different ways to get Flame, Shock, or Frost damage, or all of them. Overwhelming Surge looks good, obviously. Sench's Bite actually looks interesting. I don't know how good it's going to be, but it's interesting. 7th Legion is going to be really good. Sorry. We're just trying to get to the good stuff, and then we're just going to dive into it. Combat and gameplay. Many of the adjustments you'll find below are a result of our ongoing ability audit to adhere to standards for overall balanced quality of life, as well as some fixes for issues that require further investigation from Update 22. All right. Necromancer, Bone Tyrant, Bitter Harvest. The healing from this ability and its morphs is now properly synced up with the essence you absorb, resulting in less of a delay. Increase the healing per tick by 11%. Bone Goliath transformation. Fixed an issue where you could occasionally become stuck as a... Okay. They already talked about that one. Bone Totem. Increase the duration of this ability and its morphs by 1 second to improve its animation of the totem crumbling, along with adding a new function. These abilities will now pulse a fear once every 2 seconds after the initial 2-second delay rather than only once. Alright, so nice little buff to Bone Totem. Blast Bones. Remove the delay of the skeleton. Reduce the minimum range of the leap to 7 meters from 5 meters, so it'll leap a little bit more consistently to reduce situations where gets confused. So I was playing with Blast Bones on PTS. I don't know if it was a whole lot better. I'm just gonna have to see what happens when it goes live. But if they make it more reliably, as I said, Stam Necro is going to be very solid. Increase the cost of Boneyard. Decrease the damage because it's an AoE. Increase the bonus modifier. Skeletal Mage. All right. Shocking Siphon. We've already gone all over these changes. Restoring Tether. This building morphs no longer have a resource cost and now scale up your highest offensive stats. Okay, so this is a pretty big change. Restoring Tether. Decrease the healing per tick by 14% and reduce the stamina return per tick to 35. Okay. Scaling off your highest offensive stats looks like a pretty nice buff, in my opinion. Spirit Mender, increase the cost of ability. This is a pretty big change. I increased the healing per tick by approximately 90%. It's going to make the damage mitigation one look maybe potentially a little bit less appealing and the other healing one a lot better. Spirit Mender is actually a pretty powerful heal, and the 10% damage reduction is actually very powerful as well. So it's going to be interesting. Intensive Mender, which is the healing one. This morph now heals for twice as much per tick rather than 3 times. Reduces the duration in half, but also reduces the cost to half. Okay. Yeah, we're going to have to test these. But this looks like definitely an interesting change for healing. Definitely an interesting change for healing for Necros. Quests and Zones. This video is worth just discussing the Vigor change, to be honest. So if it may take us a little bit to get there, I'm going to try and fly through this as much as possible. If I miss anything, guys, please comment and I'll do my best to answer it. But combat and abilities. In the theme of our ongoing ability audit, many of this update's ability adjustments have been set on the goal of bringing values such as healing or damage per second and cost to be more consistent with one another. We believe that auxiliary effects and passives that are paired with these abilities are the primary means of adding depth and variety to each individual ability, while the core function should remain relatively close so you have an easier time discerning effectiveness of these abilities and there are less overall situations of dead abilities. I agree so far. Many changes you'll see also strive to add more consistencies to the behavior of how these abilities interact with things like critical strike, chance, or scaling mechanisms in hopes to remove some of the many hidden expertise moments where some abilities just feel weaker for certain builds because of arbitrary mechanisms and required failure to learn. Agreed? This being said, we also want to make it clear that our standards are not unflinching, and just because we've done a passive abilities with the audit, it doesn't mean we'll never return to them or make adjustments. The goal of standardization we've had with Update 21 and 22 is not done under the guise that our standards are perfect, but rather the focus on consistency and order. The concept of balance is highly contextual, so we've taken the stance of reining in the varied behaviors of our incredibly dynamic game so we can do a better job of moving forward addressing abilities that fall out of line. This is great that they wrote this. There are a bunch of dead abilities. They've incorporated a bunch of new ones, brought them back, like Soul Splitting Trap. The Fighters Guild skills, Entropy are now like taking a leap to the forefront. Maybe they're a little bit overtuned, you could say, but in general, like nobody was really running those in PvP, and now it's like, okay, I can potentially fit all these on my bar. I have variety, I have options, and the more variety, strong skills you have, the more options you have, the more interesting builds you can have out there. And obviously that potentially leads to imbalance and all these other things, but it's cool that you can have different builds instead of people running the same cookie cutter stuff. So in general, I agree with this. That's why they kind of nerfed AoE dot damage across the board by X amount. They increased single target damage because, in general, I agree with this as well. Single target should do more damage than AoE. Like that should just be a no-brainer, in my opinion. And so they needed to buff the single target dots. And they needed to nerf the AoE aspects, I still think Whirling Blades needs its own. We need to talk about Whirling Blades at some point, but I just do not believe that, if you're hitting somebody with a single target ability like D-Swing or Surprise Attack, it should hit harder because it's easier to, you can dodge it than like Whirling Blades. So Whirling Blades you cannot dodge, you can only block. You can block D-Swing, you can dodge D-Swing. You have other defenses to D-Swing besides, just one thing. So that's why I think AoE needs to be looked at, because you have more buffs with AoE. You eliminate some counters to it. Anyways, increase the duration of the off-balance effect on all of its players to 7 seconds from 5 seconds. This is a sneaky good buff. Off-balance, having a 40% increased buff, which is 10% more damage if you stack into the CP tree, is going to impact bow builds, potentially. It's going to impact Templars that use off-balance. They use toppling charge to proc the off-balance. DKs can obviously get it with Talons. It may bring Talons back a little bit, just because you can proc the off-balance. You're going to have 10% more damage like that. This is something to look at across a lot of builds. And so having 10% more damage by interrupting, setting people off balance via dodge roll and CP tree. You could set people off balance with the new dual wield, Shrouding Dagger, or Flying Blade, or whatever the fuck it's called. Like, there's a bunch of different ways now to get off balance, and now it lasts longer. So this is a sneaky good buff for a few builds. All player source of bleeds will now respect target's physical resistance. We already talked about that. Developer comment. Blah, blah, blah. You no longer become stuck sprinting. Grounded target abilities will be unqueued after weapon swapping. Many damage over time abilities, both single target and AoE, have been re-standardized. I just talked about this. Area of effect dots will now be 33% weaker than a single target dot. Agree with this. Like I said, you can't block AoEs. And so if it's the same ability and it's on the ground, you can't block it. You can't stop the incoming damage. And so it should be weaker because you have less counters to it. Adjust the animation and cast times for many ultimates that are meant to have IM. Okay, this is obviously the biggest change. They added a few. Nightblade in cap is 400 milliseconds. Dawnbreaker is 400 milliseconds. Berserk Strike is 400. Soul Tether is 500. And Lacerate, which is the dual wield one, is also 500. This one has gotten a lot of flack from the community because, frankly, it's an action-packed game with burst combos and everything. This is going to severely impact the way small scale and just killing people is. I don't necessarily know if this is a bad thing. Like, I don't know. Personally, I don't know if this is a bad thing because they now have given an AoE fear to everybody. And so you will be able to land. Currently, the way it is in Elsewhere, there are some classes where, like, you can't CC through block, and so you need to sneak in that cancel on somebody in order to get the kill off. And if they didn't have an AoE CC that could go through, go through block, this would be a huge change and a huge nerf to stamina classes in general, because if we look at it, stam, 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 and stam. And this is both stam and magicka. So at the end of the day, this was going to be a huge nerf. But like I said, I have landed Dawnbreakers or in caps when I didn't cancel correctly after I feared. I don't think this is going to be a big deal. It's just going to take getting used to. And it's going to give the other person a chance to counter. Because sometimes when people are really good with countering or with canceling, sometimes you just hear a bunch of skills and you have to look at your death recap and just figure out what happened. So I can see both sides of this. If they got rid of it and they said, hey, you know, no cast time on ultimates, I'm okay with that. If they're going to give this a try and, you know, it makes combat smoother and a little bit more dynamic and reactive, I'm okay with that too. So I'm open to this change personally. I talked about it more in another video. You guys can feel free to check it out. But I don't think this is as big of a deal as other people do, but we'll have to see how it plays out. Improve the responsiveness of leaving CC or breakup knockback abilities. Increase the standard range of a knockback to 8 meters from 6 meters. Okay. Pets were fixed. Sources of stamina, health, and magic cost reduction that are attained from passive abilities or item sets are now all multiplicative rather than being a mixture of additive and multiplicative. All right. Resource agnostic healing. Resource agnostic sources of healing will now use your highest critical strike chance rather than defaulting to your spell critical only. All right. Blows list of all affected abilities. Not going to go through that. We'll look at that later. Oblivion got a huge change. Overall, I like what they did. Basically, Oblivion is going to be great for tanks, and it's going to be like a nerf versus everybody else. With how I'm reading it, I'm not saying I'm right. That's just what it looks like. Buffs and debuffs, major heroism, fix that, minor lifesteal, searing heat, lava whip. I know I'm scrolling through a bunch of this, guys, but like if it's been unchanged, I'm not going to reread something that I've already read. Like this video is probably going to be 20 to 30 minutes anyways, so if you see me going through Dragon Knight things, it's because I've already posted a video on it. I've already talked about it. I don't want to keep talking about the same thing because I'm already boring enough as it is. Let's be honest. I'm not very exciting when I'm reading patch notes, and so I don't want to be more boring. I want to be a little bit more exciting, a little bit more sexy. So hopefully, you know, you guys have like, you know, loosened up your scarf a little bit here, and you're like, oh, I like where he's going with this. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, all these changes are basically the same. Like, I'm not seeing a whole bunch here. Damage mitigation on Nightblade is the same. Teleport strike. I've gone through these patch notes so many times. It's just kind of whatever. Summon Shade, increase cost. All right, drain power. That's still, power extraction is still weird for me. Like, I don't know why it's not weapon and spell damage, but decrease cost ability from cripple. Yep. Dark magic, crystal frags. Crystal frags got to rework, obviously. Stable familiar. Reduce the healing from Clan Fear, Winged Twilight. Reduce the damage by 69% on Twilight, which is great. It was doing way too much damage. In general, that was way too much damage. Bolt Escape is unblockable. Fatigue Morph is a huge change for Sorks. The reduced cost for how it escalates when you streak is going to allow them to sustain a little bit better, offsetting some of the harness changes. Overload. Overload heavy attack is all the rage right now. So them fixing overload heavy attack's interesting. I'm expecting that to be a nerf here in the future. Power surge changes. Honestly, this needs to be tested, but these are very huge changes for Sork healing. I just don't know exactly how this is going to work, so I don't want to make comments on something and, you know, people, you know, say what I've been saying and then I'm definitely wrong. I'm just saying, like, Power Surge is now changing quite a bit. Power Surge now grants its healing to up to 6 targets, but will trigger off critical heals rather than critical damage. So this makes Sork healers interesting because critical healing, you with multiple AoEs, like potentially triggering Power Surge heals to up to 6 targets is very, very interesting. I don't know how powerful that's going to be, but in general, like Crit Surge has been rivaled when it's fully buffed. It's it's been compared to like Major Mending as far as like what the heals provide. Power Surge isn't nearly as powerful of a heal as Critical Surge. Like I think it's like halved if I remember correctly, or close to it. So, but critically healing with Power Surge up to 6 people is, you know, like we're talking about a pretty big buff to overall healing for a Sorc healer. Plus you have access to negate. It's very, very interesting, but I don't know how good it's going to be. Reduced cost of Puncturing Strike, Spear Wall, Eclipse. Sphere can no longer be CC broken but can still be cleansed. This is still just a weird skill. Total Dark. The heal value increased by approximately 66% to the original value, but now can occur every half second rather than every 0.75 seconds. All right. Unstable Core. Solar Flare. Solar Barrage got a pretty big nerf. Backlash got a pretty big nerf. Restoring Aura. Warden. Two-handed Onslaught. Onslaught is a huge change, going to be very good. Momentum, reduce the cost. Let's see if they... Rally got a pretty big buff overall in like how it heals, so pretty big healing buff for stamina builds. So no longer 10%, but they increased the damage of D-Swing by 9%. Reduced the cast time. So there's that. One-handed shield, defensive posture, bone shield, defensive stance. There's a bunch of changes there with absorb magic and defensive stance that I haven't really gone into. Power slam is going to be damage, puncture, shield charge. You know, we're just going to scroll through this as fast as possible. This is a buff for poison injection. Is a buff. It's a buff and upfront damage. So this is tough to. I'm just going to explain this one really quickly because this one's kind of tough to understand unless you like just do the math on it. But they increase the damage over time portion on all morphs by approximately 78%. So the upfront dot damage of Poison Arrow is a buff. Poison Injection, it says they reduce the execute multiplier from 100% from 260%. So as an example, if we pull out a calculator, I'll just show this to you guys really quick because this is the one thing that I've got to talk to about a little bit. But let's say hypothetically, you have a dot tick of Poison Injection that currently does 1,000 damage, right? So up front, you're going to do 1,000 damage, and then your multiplier will be 260. So you times this by 260%, it does roughly 3,600 damage per second. So this new modifier will provide upfront damage of 1,780. So you get a pretty big buff to your upfront damage, and then when they're below 50% health and it starts scaling, times this times 2, instead of doing 3,600, it does 3,560 at its max. So you still have pretty good scaling because of the upfront damage. It's just more upfront dot damage. And so Poison Arrow is actually like an overall buff to the damage. Rapid Fire, Scatter Shot, Snipe, Volley. They buffed Snipe a little bit. Destruction Staff, these went through some huge changes. Force Siphon, Grand Healing, Regen. All the healing changes were pretty big. Ward changes are very minimal in CP. Soul Strike. Soul Strike is an interesting change. They increased the cast time. Honestly, in general, like I talked about in the past, the only time I've really died from Soul Assault recently is because after a few of them, it drains my stamina. And so, not because of the burst, but because it drains my stamina. Increasing the duration of Soul Assault is going to give people an opportunity to kill you, but it's also going to give yourself an opportunity to drain like tanks' blocking resources because you're just constantly putting more pressure on them, reducing the amount of stamina they'll have to block in the future. And so I'm not saying this is a different change. And then the increased cost is clearly a pretty big nerf. So Soul Trap, one of the biggest buffs. Reduced cost of Bat Swarm. Clouding Swarm is reduced cost of 200. Wow. Drain Essence. Mist Form. Werewolf. Their bleeds went through a huge change. Honestly, guys, I don't want to talk a bunch of shit about werewolves, but I don't run one because I don't like how their light attacks cause a bleed damage that constantly just reapplies. So even if you're like a Templar and you're purifying, it's like, oh, cool, light attacks. Light attack, we're going to put a bleed on you. Oh, you're going to purify? Light attack. Now we're going to just ignore all of the resistances you have. I think it's BS. Like, I just don't like Werewolf for that reason. So in general, I don't really play him a whole lot for that specific reason. Equilibrium, Fire Rune, Meteor, Sigic Order, Undaunted, all these changes. We really just want to get to the Vigor changes because this is what I talked about before. But Vigor, adhere this ability to our AoE hot standards, increase the duration to 8 seconds from 5 seconds, but decrease the tick frequency to 2 seconds from 1 second. So Vigor got an overhaul in what it does. They increased the healing per tick by approximately 33%, reduced the cost from $35.11 to $29.84. So it's going to cost a little bit cheaper. Resolving Vigor, this morph doubles the frequency but halves the duration and increases the healing per tick by approximately 43%, but now only applies to your character. So this makes sense to me, guys. This is a self-based heal. You can no longer stack Resolving Vigor on top of each other. The Echoing Vigor had a huge change because it was providing too much healing. Like, people were going into PvE with Echoing Vigor, and they were getting rid of healers because they could just stack Echoing Vigors on top of each other and provide all the healing in the group that they needed. So it makes sense to make healers viable to reduce Echoing Vigor. However, like I showed in my video last week, Resolving Vigor was in its form in 5.1.4 was going to make medium armor builds completely unviable. They buffed dots by a lot. I showed basically like 2 or 3 damage over time effects. The new damage over time effects were going to just completely negate the cost of Vigor and the healing you were going to get. So you legitimately just weren't going to be able to survive in medium. People were going to have to go heavy recovery builds, and it was just going to basically like pigeonhole everybody into very specific builds. Now, with these changes, guys, Vigor got a huge buff that's in line with a bunch of other heals. However, like I talked about before, guys, Stamina only really has access to 2 heals. They got the Rally boost, and they got Stamina. They got Resolving Vigor, which is also a huge boost. However, damage over time effects, Soul Splitting Trap, Entropy are going to fit themselves on most Magicka bars. I'm going to try and fit Soul Splitting Trap on most of my Stamina builds as well, just because it's an AoE dot. Like, it has to go on a bar. And so it's such a good damage over time effect that most of my builds are going to have, they're going to be a little bit more bursty with Onslaught and D-Swing, or, just Onslaught, and they're going to have more damage over time. And so you're going to need this healing in order to survive. But like I talked about in another video, you will not have 100% uptime on this. So Resolving Vigor is only going to last 4 seconds instead of 5, which doesn't seem like a big difference, but most Stamina users use Vigor defensively. They pop Vigor before they go into a fight so that when they start taking damage, they're healing as it happens. And so you have to be very proactive with your Vigor heals. Like, the minute you're at half health, if you pop a Vigor at that point, you have to dodge like crazy in order to get your heals up. In general, on most Stamina builds, because it's a heal over time, and in order to heal yourself up to full, you need to not take damage. You need to be proactive with Vigor. This is requiring you to be more proactive because they reduced the amount of time you're going to have Vigor on you by 20%. So you're going to have to weapon swap more, you're going to have to Vigor more, pop Vigor more. And so this is going to increase the cost a little bit to have this uptime. But with the overall dot boost, it just made sense to buff Vigor, especially a Resolving Vigor. You're not going to get heals from your buddies. So like currently, if you're with a Stamplar buddy and he's running Troll King and he pops a Vigor on you, he can proc Troll King on you and help you by a lot. He can no longer do that unless he puts Purify down. So only his Purify can now heal you. He can't give you a Resolving Vigor tick. You can no longer stack Resolving Vigors. And so having this be a stronger self-heal is going to still provide openings for Magicka classes to apply dots to you, because Entropy is 12 seconds, if I remember correctly. Soul Splitting Trap is 10 seconds. Other dots are 10 seconds. You're going to have to cast Vigor twice in order to make sure that these dots aren't just going to eat you up. And so overall, I don't know if this healing is right, but it needed to be buffed from 5.1.4. And yes, there are going to be situations and builds where some Stamina classes, namely Stam DKs, are going to potentially abuse the new healing. It's possible that they'll be able to abuse the new healing with Major Mending, with Cauterize, and with these new Vigor ticks, and they're going to be tough to kill because of all the stuff that's happening. However, they do also have to eat all these dots, and so I think you'll be able to wear down their resources if you have more of a dot-based build and just kind of go through there. They also reduce the overall burst damage from 7th Legion and Fury by like a lot. So 7th Legion is now 350 weapon damage instead of 500. Fury is now 600 instead of 750. So they did nerf the burst ability of DKs, but they will have high survivability with the amount of healing that they're going to get. And so, although this could happen, and possibly will happen next patch, where there will be builds that are scaling into health recovery and these crazy heals and all this stuff, and you're going to have some unkillable builds. That's no different than what it currently is. There already is unkillable builds. And so they need to go out and they need to address those individual builds and figure out what's causing them to tick and what they need to do to address them, to nerf them to unkillable status so that everybody can kind of play. Because basically, their previous standard was going to eliminate everything but a few builds. This is going to make a few builds potentially unkillable in certain scenarios, but it's going to open up opportunity for everybody else. And so at the end of the day, I think variety is the way to go. Like I said, I mean, you're still going to have problems. You're always going to have problems. Like, it took me a long time to get here, but you are going to, when you introduce this many changes, you are going to have builds that are going to pose balance issues. Like, that's just the way it's going to be, guys. You're going to have unkillable mag classes. If they're running like Total Dark plus Rapid Regen plus VMA Resto plus Honor the Dead, and they're purifying, basically they can purify all your dots and they have all this recovery, they're going to be really tough to kill next patch because your dots aren't doing a whole lot. And then they have the Total Dark or Living Dark that's on top of them, healing them, and then they have the new Purify that's healing them. It's like they just have a lot of sources of healing, and it's going to take a little bit. And so there's ways to abuse this on like every single class. Now it's like every class has potential to abuse healing because every class got these huge healing buffs. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, but I am happy that they looked at Vigor, they looked at the community, they saw all the backlash for the change, and they're like, if they were going to nerf Vigor that much, they literally needed to go look at Rapid Regen, the Purify heal, everything else that they buffed, and they need to say, you know what? If we're going to address Vigor in this way because Vigor was too much, these need to be addressed too, and they need to be brought back down. They didn't, and then they did this, and I think this is a very nice change, but we'll have to see how it plays out. I will post the patch notes in the section below, but I mostly wanted to just talk about Vigor because I think that's the sneaky one that they snuck in. Obviously, I talked about a couple other things in here, but if I missed anything, any big changes that I haven't talked about in the past, like I said, these are long patch notes. I didn't want to make a 2-hour video, but the Vigor is worth talking about. And I will post a timeline where I actually just talk about Vigor. But yeah, a lot of good changes. Overall, guys, at this point, I like where it's going. Like I said before, I think more dot-based meta with reactive healing, where people have to heal themselves more. They get higher reward for being able to heal themselves more, and there's not as much passive healing where a group is just unkillable because they have 2 healers in a group. I think that's a good thing. I think having the ability to have AoE dots that you can stack on a bunch of people, and if the healer isn't very good and they're not applying these heals, you can wear out resources by applying damage to a bunch of people. I like that a lot. And if the healer is good, and his counterparts aren't, and they're not healing themselves, and he has to spam heals, he's going to eventually run out of resources because he has to heal 6 other people that aren't doing a good job of healing themselves. So it's going to open opportunities to potentially 1vx, but it also is going to open opportunities to xv1 because entropy is undodgeable. Soul Splitting Trap is undodgeable. You're going to have, like, if you're 1v6ing and they all have Soul Splitting Trap and they hit you, you're going to have a bunch of damage over time on you that you just have to be able to potentially heal through and, like, kite around and survive, and it's going to be a pain in the ass. And so it's going to be interesting to see how this patch goes. I see some definite opportunities for 1vx, and I see some things where xv1 could be worse. So, but overall, like, I like the change. I like moving away from the tank meta. Like, the tank meta sucks, guys. Like a more action-packed, fast-paced environment where people are dying, and everybody can die is the way it should be. Like, you shouldn't have unkillable builds that can also dish out damage or provide immense healing for their group. So getting away from that, I think they did a really good job overall with the buffs that they did. We're going to find the imbalance when we see it. I will call it out. Like, when we find unkillable builds or different things like we always do, we'll talk about it. We'll talk about what needs to happen, how we can adjust that one specific thing without completely impacting PvP as a whole. So I'm going to leave it there. If you guys have any questions or comments, as I said, I'm always open to critiquing. If I missed something and you want me to talk about it, I can comment on it in the section below. This is going to probably conclude my scale breaker discussion. Probably no more PTS videos, probably no more build video or discussion on the healing and all this stuff, where today is the PC scale breaker DLC. So probably in a couple weeks we'll get it on Xbox and PS4, and I'll just start working on builds going towards that. So thanks for tuning in, guys. Really appreciate it. Always open to critique or your opinion. Thank you for watching, guys. Have a nice day.